Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who's currently still in London at these talks, is technically scheduled to testify before the House Ways and Means Committee tomorrow morning on the budget for the fiscal year.
Yeah, I'm not sure how we're going to do that.
Yeah.
It does bring us to matters, of course, on Capitol Hill, though, Kailey, and some big questions about what happens to the big, beautiful bill if we are going to be in store for some changes as soon as today.
Indeed. And it's on that note we turn to Capitol Hill now, where we're joined live by the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, the Republican congressman from Missouri, Jason Smith, back with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Mr. Chairman, we appreciate you being here on Balance of Power. As we consider the changes that are underway in the Senate, have you been read in to what the Senate parliamentarian is saying needs to be stripped from this package?
Yeah, the Senate parliamentarian has been ruling on various different items. It's really have not been that many, especially when it comes to the tax policy. These are things that we have been very careful that when we were trying to draft the legislation over on the House side, that it would be Byrd compliant and be able to follow the rules of reconciliation, and that would fly for the parliamentarian. However, a few things that might have to be changed will be done before we send the final bill over to
Well, and what are those few
Senate.
things, Mr. Chairman? What are
We're
they?
still waiting. We're still waiting for the final analysis, but when it comes to some tax policies that were discussed, for example, provisions that was in the bill that affect non-for-profits that are funding terrorism. That was not a budgetary impact, and so it had to be taken out. It's things like that, nothing of major significance that will alter the bill. The biggest things that I think is still left to be decided by the Senate parliamentarian when it comes to tax policy is eliminating the reployment tax credit, and also something in regards to Purple Heart designation.
Interesting. Mr. Chairman, I know there's an important Rules Committee meeting on the House side about an hour from now. Will those changes be made in that session so you can do this before it's technically in the hands of the Senate?
I don't serve on the Rules Committee, but it's very possibly those changes will be made before it is released to the Senate. And the Senate is working around the clock on this bill. They've been working with their fellow colleagues over in the Senate and trying to thread the needle that we thread over in the House of Representatives. It's very, very tough to thread that needle when you look at the debt and deficit hawks, that some want to cut more money, others think you're cutting too much. It's the same way with all the green credits. Some folks want the green credits eliminated immediately. Others want to use a scalpel and look at an approach. And it's the same with the state and local tax deduction. There's some senators over there that they don't like it, but they know that they have to balance it in order to make sure we get 218 in the House and 51 in the Senate.
Well, and it doesn't look like they're stopping at changes to SALT. We've heard talk as well of senators, the Senate looking to make changes to the no tax on tips and overtime measures that were included in the House package. In fact, the Senate Budget Chair, Lindsey Graham, told Semaphore in an interview earlier today that he thinks those things may not fit in this mega bill. Therefore, there might need to be another budget reconciliation package later down the line. And Mr. Chairman, I wonder what your response to that is.
That's a no-go. It would be dead on arrival. The senators need to know that we have followed through. We passed this one big, beautiful bill. It's what the president has asked. They need to do the same thing. There's no reason for those senators to kick the can down the road on priorities that the president campaigned on. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime. These are items that the president spoke at every one of his rallies, and 77 million people voted for him. The House delivered on it. The Senate will deliver on it as well.
Well, Mr. Chairman, we just arrived at one deal breaker in your words here, and I wonder what some of the others are. You hear all the same talk that everybody hears. In fact, I'm sure you know a lot more about it than we do, which is why we're glad to have you with us today. When you talk about changes to SALT, you talk about pulling out the so-called revenge tax, maybe some of the green incentives that are in there. What's the deal breaker on the House side? Because the conventional wisdom we keep hearing is the Freedom Caucus will deal with it if the SALT number stays where it is, for instance, that some of the issues from the more conservative members of the House will have to be dealt with because you need to keep the moderates, the New York, New Jersey, California delegations happy. Am I anywhere close to true on this?
The deal breaker is whenever you get out of balance. We struck a very good balance of passing a bill 215 to 214 in the House of Representatives. You have to thread a very narrow needle, and that's what the deal breaker could be, is if the Senate adjusts it too much one way or the other. You could either lose members of the right flank, or you could lose members on the left flank. And so those are things that we're balancing, and that is what could be fatal. But failure's not an option. We're going to get this done. Leader Thune, Chairman Crapo, they are navigating it over on their side of the building, and they understand the huge dynamics that we have within the House of Representatives, and they're going to make some changes over there, but I don't see those to be mega changes that are going to be catastrophic. It's going to be changes that probably will make the bill better.
Well, what about the change specifically, or the decision to drop the AI regulation moratorium? Have you heard from colleagues in the House as to whether or not that's a deal breaker for any of them?
We've had colleagues in the House that has raised a lot of concerns about it. Of course, that was not in the Ways and Means jurisdiction whenever it was put in, but it's something I think that I know that the Senate is definitely addressing.
I'm curious as well about some of the green incentives, Mr. Chairman. There's reporting that more than 30 owners of rural energy companies are swarming the Hill today, knocking on doors. Maybe they've been knocking on yours to urge Republican lawmakers to preserve clean energy tax credits. Let's put EVs aside and the whole Elon Musk conversation. When it comes to wind and solar, if those are restored in the Senate, is that a deal breaker in the House?
So we cut over $500 billion of the green energy credits. This is something that the president called for. This is something that the majority of the House Republicans called for. You have to understand, not one Republican in the House or the Senate voted for these green credits in the Inflation Reduction Act. And so we tried to use a very balanced approach so that it didn't rip the rug from underneath industries that have invested already within the current tax policies, and we figured out a way to phase it out over a period of time. You just have to be balanced. We cannot be extreme in just ripping them away. We cannot be extreme in not taking them away. So it's right in the middle. You have to be right in the middle, and that's what we're doing.
Well, and as you talk about needing to be right in the middle, how this is a very difficult line to walk for both chambers, Mr. Chairman, when we consider the Congressional Budget Office yesterday released another estimate of when the U.S. will reach the X date, when it can no longer fulfill its debt obligations, guessing that could be as soon as mid-August when you and your colleagues are on recess. Can you rule out entirely that the debt ceiling is not going to have to be addressed separately if by the end of July this bill has not worked its way through both chambers? What odds would you put around that?
The House has increased the debt ceiling. We've addressed that in the One Big Beautiful Bill. The Senate needs to act. We have said all along, let's put this bill on the president's desk by July 4th, and then you have nothing to worry about. The Senate trying to break different items in 15 different bills is a no-go. We have delivered in the House. They need to deliver in the Senate.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if you've had a chance to speak with Elon Musk or any of his allies since he took a position of opposition on this bill, and whether he's giving members of the Freedom Caucus or anyone in the Republican conference in the House, or for that matter, Republicans in the Senate, cover to vote no.
Let me just say this. The bill that we passed, the One Big Beautiful Bill, is the largest cut to spending in the history of our country, almost $1.7 trillion. With all the great work that Elon and Doge has done in cutting, they cut $175 billion in 5 months. The bill that we passed out of the House cut $1.69 trillion. Could we cut more? I would love to cut more, but it's still the largest cut in the history of America. And that's what I like to point out. Whenever people try to use the accounting measure saying that it's going to add $2+ trillion to the deficit, I believe that is funny math, because what they are referring to is existing tax policy is going to cost roughly $4 trillion. And that's not the case. Our revenues into this country right now is 17.2% of GDP. And if you look at the historic level over the last 50 years, revenues to GDP has been right at 17%. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem.
Well, finally, Mr. Chairman, on the revenue side, tariffs, of course, factor into that equation. And just quickly, we have a minute left here on tariffs. The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, is currently still in London working on trade negotiations with China that are expected to go late into the night local time. Are you still expecting him before the committee for his testimony tomorrow morning?
I am still expecting him before the committee. It looks like he may have a long night, but I'm grateful for the work that he's doing, Howard Lutnick and Ambassador Greer is doing, because they are working and representing the United States when it comes to China and all the other countries coming to the table to make sure that the American worker, American manufacturer, and American farmer is treated fairly on a world stage.
You may need stronger coffee tomorrow morning, Mr. Chairman. This ought to be interesting.
Energy drinks for them.
I guess. All right, I guess we lost Congressman Jason Smith, Republican chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. Wanted that last word. We'll assemble our panel next. Yeah, okay. Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino are on the way in here on the fastest show in politics. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Continuing drama over protests in Los Angeles, where, of course, we've seen the deployment of another 2,000 National Guard members after the initial 2,000 members deployed over the weekend. And, of course, 700 Marines, active duty Marines, have now arrived in Los Angeles as well, as President Trump describes that as an effort necessary to keep Los Angeles from burning and to control the activity we're seeing. But he also said in the Oval Office while speaking to reporters in the last hour that he spoke with California's Governor Gavin Newsom a day ago. To quote the president, called him up to tell him, got to do a better job. He's doing a bad job. To which the governor is now responding, there was no call. Joe, he says, not even a voicemail.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom going on to write that Americans should be alarmed that a president deploying Marines onto our streets doesn't even know who he is talking to. Kind of taking a page from Trump, the way he talks about Joe Biden. Let's assemble our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino are on board with us today, back together for the first time in over a week. Rick is our Republican strategist and partner at Stone Court Capital. Jeannie, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, and Bloomberg Politics contributor. Jeannie, we keep hearing that this is good politics for Donald Trump. This seems like it's pretty good politics for Gavin Newsom, too. What do you think?
It is. And, you know, I share Gavin Newsom's use of the word alarm, but probably not for the same reason he's using it. I am alarmed that a president would say just minutes ago in the Oval Office that if you're going to protest on the 250th anniversary, you will be met with heavy force, without differentiating that peaceful protest is one of the linchpins of being an American, our right to speak and assemble. I'm alarmed that he would send troops in without being asked by the governor, but I'm also alarmed on the Democratic side that they are playing into this theatricality. The reality is that we do need a solution to immigration. And the kind of solution we need is not this performative back and forth of, you know, our leaders on social media yelling at each other. It is a legislation out of Congress, like Rick's former boss, John McCain, put together. That's what we need. And what's alarming is we are nowhere close to there. And oh, by the way, we have a director of Homeland Security who went on TV last night and said everybody in LA is a criminal. That kind of performative nonsense is not what we need. We need solutions.
Well, when we consider the performance, if you will, Rick, and the continued escalation we see, President Trump was asked in the Oval Office by a reporter if he would consider invoking the Insurrection Act. And he said, if there's an insurrection, I will invoke the Insurrection Act. That, of course, would carve out what is not allowed thanks to the Posse Comitatus Act, which is the U.S. military acting in a law enforcement capacity. Do you really believe the president would go there?
It's hard to tell in these circumstances. He gets a question, he feels like he's got to answer the question, and I thought it was actually pretty non-committal. But look, I mean, the difference between the Marines going to California and protecting the assets of the federal government, courthouses and federal government centers where some of the deportees are being held, that's one thing. But then, basically them acting as a police squad in any jurisdiction of America is going to have a different reaction. Right now, we're debating whether or not a phone call was made or who asked for what. In that case, when you take that kind of constitutional action where you suspend posse comitatus, I think you would see a national dialogue erupt of epic proportions, because you really wonder at what point does the violence have to occur to have that triggered in a Donald Trump administration. And I don't think we know the answer to that question. And pretty much I don't think he did either when he answered the question today. So stay tuned on this. Luckily, it looks like some of the riots have dispelled in LA and it's starting to quiet down. So hopefully it won't matter in this instance. But I think it's definitely a page to watch.
Interesting as we learn more about some of the folks who were arrested, Jeannie. Isn't that interesting? We're not hearing very much about what went behind these arrests. In some cases, there were violent criminals. We heard about a handful of them, but we're learning more now as well about, for instance, Juan Fernando, detained by ICE at his job at a clothing factory, transported back to the country he had left behind without much time passed. To be the same day he was pulled out of his job and immediately deported. His family is asking for due process. Are we going to go through this all over again with this group like we did with those deported to El Salvador?
I think we probably will. The reality is Donald Trump deserves credit for shutting the border. We need common sense immigration reform, and it is neither cost effective nor enforceable for the United States to deport people who have been here, many of them brought as young people, for their entire lives, who are working and paying taxes, to pick them up at Home Depot or, like you're talking about, these people. Criminals, absolutely. But that was part of the DACA. And Donald Trump had embraced some of that in the past. Now he is being pushed by the likes of Stephen Miller, as is ICE, to deport 2,000 to 3,000 people per day. That means you go to peaceful tax-paying people who, by the way, are paying taxes and helping our economy. It is not a common sense solution to a real crisis and problem we've long had. And the president should be called out for not working with Congress to get a deal done. This is the same person, for electoral reasons in January, blew up, much to the dismay of Republicans, a very strong immigration bill that could have moved us forward. That's what Americans should be alarmed about.
Well, when we consider immigration-related legislation, though, Rick, the White House in recent days has been very quick to point everyone to the fact that the One Big Beautiful Bill working its way through the Hill right now does include funding for more ICE agents, more customs agents, more Border Patrol agents. How does that factor into the overall likelihood of the bill sailing through, or at least getting through easier, shall we say?
Yeah, I would say the one item that has not generated much controversy at this point in time in the Big Beautiful Bill, the reconciliation bill, has been money for the Homeland Security and for Department of Defense and their portion on things like building the wall. So the reality is this is one where most Republicans have been jumping on board. It's gotten some criticism for being a big spending item. We just talked to the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. Basically, from what I could tell, what he was saying is we've cut enough, don't need to cut anymore. And so probably no appetite in the House side, I guess, to go after those funds. But the reality is it's a significant over $300 billion commitment at a time when border security seems to be handled pretty well. And so It's really deportations. And I could just add, there have been more deportations in the first year at this point in time in the Biden administration than it is today. Donald Trump's deporting fewer people. So it's not the issue of deportation as it exists. That's happened throughout all the administrations. It's the tactics under which they're using the deportation rules to their advantage.
Well, that's a really important point to make. Rick, it's kind of ironic, Jeannie. Remember, the big argument was, do we do this in one big, beautiful bill? That's why we call it that, because the other option was to break it in two. That was the John Thune option. Get the border money out the door, and we'll spend time on taxes and the rest, which will be more difficult to debate. Well, here we are. One big, beautiful bill was the answer. And it's kind of ironic that based on current events, it is, in fact, the border component that could help push this over the finish line, isn't it?
Yeah, it's ironic, or it is something that the the administration helped to sort of push forward. But the reality
this was all part of the plan, is what you're saying.
I don't know, but I'm not sure it's ironic. But the reality is that this bill funds the border. That is fine. But what we need is immigration reform. We have 6 to 7 million people in this country. The government doesn't even know, they can't tell you, who were brought here as babies and children. Are we really going to pick these people up, take them to a place or push them out to a place they've never been and know nothing about while they have done nothing wrong? Very few Americans support that tactic. We have to find a common sense pathway to citizenship. Yes, close the border. Yes, fund border security. Yes, deal with people who are committing crimes. But yes, also find a common sense way to keep people who are working and contributing in this country, especially people who were brought here, who work with many of us, and we know many personally. They are friends, neighbors, and family members. They are here and they should be supported in an effort to stay here and to continue contributing to this great country. That's where the president's plan here and Stephen Miller's, quite frankly, falls very short.
Rick, in our final minute, your degree of confidence that that common sense solution can be found in the near term?
Well, I certainly worked hard enough with John McCain to try and have a comprehensive immigration bill passed, and didn't work out so well. But it is the way to actually have all these jobs that people are getting deported from to be filled with people who actually come in legally. And of course, I think there's a broad bipartisan support for legal immigration reform. And it's just not the administration that's likely to pass it. But it would be a very good thing in the heels of this current debate to be contemplating if you're the Trump administration.
Talking about motivations here on both sides of the aisle, Jeannie, would it help Democrats if this did not fizzle out and in fact spread to other cities as we consider messaging ahead of the midterms?
Maybe politically, but, I think many Americans are tired of thinking about this from a political lens. I mean, we need solutions. And so, if it helps Democrats, that's fine for Democrats, but it doesn't help the United States as a whole not to treat people the way they should be treated and to keep people brought here as children here, contributing to society and making us the best we can. So I think that's also important, as in addition to the political end.
All right, Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors in our political panel on this Tuesday. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power, and we'll have more ahead here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Bloomberg Radio, satellite radio, channel 121. Maybe you're watching us on YouTube right now. If not, this is the coolest thing we have going. Search Bloomberg Business News Live. It's not just this show. It's all the way. Surveillance through the day, Bloomberg Business Week Daily. And we are always live for you in the studio with our great guests here in Washington as we try to get our arms around reconciliation, kind of like the Senate's trying to do as we speak. Some important things are going to take place today, all procedural. But if you want to sound smart at the cocktail party, we're about to get you ready. On this Tuesday edition, right? It's Tuesday, which means we have about 3.5 weeks until the fake deadline of the 4th of July that even the president doesn't seem to care about. Yesterday at this Invest event, he's sitting next to Speaker Johnson. 4th of July, he said, yeah, or it might take a little longer. Is something going on over there, James? They're gathering the pool. It's noontime. This happens every day. We can just talk amongst ourselves. I get up in the morning. I do my reading. I talk to the people I trust, try to figure out what's going on in the world. We start mapping out the show. Then I connect with producer James, Booker Matt, co-anchor Kailey. We come up with a plan, different people to call. You book some things. You map out a show. This is what we're going to have for our viewers and listeners. And then at high noon, they assemble the press pool. Donald Trump starts talking, and it all goes off the rails. Maybe we'll do this again together. At least we enjoy each other, right? This is the new world we're in. And a big part of this new world is the effort that's unfolding right now on Capitol Hill. Yeah, Cece's part of this mix, too. It's a big family behind this show. The Rules Committee is going to get down to brass tacks today in the House at 2 o'clock. That's right around the time we get off the air, 2 hours from now. In the meantime, they're expecting a report from the parliamentarian in the Senate. Right? This is the referee who says you can do this in reconciliation. You're not allowed to do that. Budget matters, yes. Everything else, no. This is the bird bath, the bird rule we talk about. And so by the end of this day, I suspect we're going to have a much better idea of what's going to end up in the Senate version of this bill. And that's why we have Nathan Dean with us, senior U.S. policy analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. His phone is ringing because we're actually getting onto something here. Nathan, it's great to see you. What's the parliamentarian going to tell us today?
So I think the parliamentarian is going to allow most of what the investable angle or the investment community cares about. Obviously, these tax cuts, the extensions, the cuts to Medicaid, Inflation Reduction Act, SNAP benefits. Yep. You know, we think it's going to be more structural things. Things like where they're trying to get rid of the Office of Financial Research, or maybe changing the funding mechanism of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Things that are very important for us here in Washington, but for the New York community that's investing in this, we'd say it's probably most likely going to be out. Because the general rule of thumb is that if it impacts the budget, then it's allowed. But, you know, every single party, any single time they do a reconciliation package, they throw in the kitchen sink and they say, let's try and do this. So the Senate parliamentarian is going to come out later today. She's going to say, no, you can't do that. I don't think there's going to be a lot of fireworks here. And obviously the Senate does have the ability to just fire the parliamentarian or ignore the parliamentarian.
Yeah, right.
But, you know, I don't think that's going to happen in this case because I don't think they're going to get any major controversies.
I'm waiting to hear when Donald Trump tells John Thune what happens with you. Ignore the parliamentarian, but we'll deal with that when it happens. That could be an interesting standoff. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime. This gets through the bird bath. It's more lawmakers who are concerned about those?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think it's one of those things where, you know, it's not going to be so much of a parliamentarian decision. It's going to be a deficit question. And that's where we're going at with all this. And in fact, we put a note out just this morning to our clients. And it always is going to come down to the deficit because, you know, and I should have said earlier, the biggest question we're waiting for is whether or not the parliamentarian is going to allow the Senate to use current baseline policy as zero, meaning to extend the Trump-era tax cuts, the cost is effectively zero. If the parliamentarian approves that, which I think she will, if the parliamentarian approves it, then, you know, you don't really have to cut all that much to actually keep this package going forward. And that's why we always think that the deficit is the most likely impacted entity here from this package. Looking at Medicaid, the Inflation Reduction Act, SNAP benefits, it's much easier for the Senate to say, you know what, let's not cut those to the extent that the House proposed. Let's pull that back a little bit. We'll borrow today and we'll vote for something that will actually be tomorrow's pain as opposed to voting for something that's going to hurt our constituents in the next year or so.
Understood. So let's lay out the concerns. You could really count them on one hand, right? What actually is going to be a concern for senators, and then when it comes back to the House, could be deal breakers. You change the cap on salt, you could lose a couple of lawmakers. The revenge tax is something we keep hearing about. Banks are calling you about it. Nathan, what is it?
Yeah, so this is Section 899. This is something that it hasn't gotten a ton of press. I mean, Bloomberg News has done some extensive reporting on this, but it's called the revenge tax. It essentially allows the Treasury Department to deem a foreign country a unfair foreign country or a discriminatory tax environment, and then allows the Treasury Department to put essentially a 5% tax levy on essentially all passive income, real estate, income from foreign countries and so forth. So if you think of you're a U.S. entity or a foreign bank here in the United States and your income's going back to HQ, well, now all of a sudden you have an additional tax on that. It's 5%. It goes up annually up till about 20%, unless that's essentially deemed, that country gets off. It's designed as a way to combat what they consider discriminatory digital taxes, mostly in the tech space. My colleague Andrew Silverman and I looked at it. It's going to most likely impact banks and the tech companies in particular, because if overseas firms decides they're not going to play in the United States anymore, then that's actually somewhat bad. So the main question we've been getting is the Senate going to pull this out? Senator Thune said that he's been looking at it. We think it's either going to be pulled out or it's going to be watered significantly.
Okay.
So we'll see.
Very important. Who does that offend if they take it out? Is there a constituency behind this in the House that Thune needs to worry about?
Well, I don't think that there's a constituency as to the point where you're going to see a coalition come together and try and fight
like
this.
a SALT caucus.
Exactly. I don't think you're going to see a SALT caucus. I actually don't think it was all that controversial when the House lawmakers put it in there, because in their eyes, it just gives the Treasury Department flexibility. It doesn't say that this has to happen. It just says that this is another tool. I almost said weapon. Another tool that would allow the Treasury Department and the White House to actually use when conducting its negotiations.
Okay.
I don't think it was all that controversial when it was put in. I think it was one of those unintended consequences that was coming, especially from the non-U.S. foreign community.
It would be kind of cool if there was a revenge caucus. If there was something called that. All right, then we've got green incentives, tax credits. Thom Tillis is calling. If some of these are put back in, who do you lose in the House?
So I think this is one of those where, if you look at the original bill that came out from the House Ways and Means Committee, the electric vehicle tax credit was gone. I think that's still gone, despite Elon Musk's, discussions about it. I think if you're Tesla or any of the car companies relying on it, and our view is that Tesla isn't so much relying on it, but I think that's gone. The bigger question is when it comes to wind and solar. And a lot of these tax credits, there was a phase out, and that phase out was pushed up.
Yes, right.
We think the phase out will get pushed back. Okay. Maybe not to the original House and Ways Means text where the solar, for example, was 2028 from 2031. But, it will get pushed back a little bit just because the Inflation Reduction Act is very important to states like North Carolina because there's a lot of foreign CapEx money coming into the United States. And there's a lot of constituents out there, lawmakers, who are saying, look, I got 700 jobs being built in this district.
Wow.
I got a plant being built in this district.
Right.
So we think it's going to get pushed back. So keep in mind for stocks like First Solar and Enphase, these things have hot sauce. They're almost like what we call the marijuana hot sauce stocks. Right. These things have been bouncing up and down based off of what's in this language. So definitely watch this later this week because those stocks have hot sauce on it.
Not always based on fundies, as they say. We've got a minute left here. Nathan, you running odds? 4th of July, August?
We think the Senate can get it done around the 4th of July. I like to joke it's going to come a little bit later because I'll be on vacation. But I think we're saying 80% chance by the August recess. We're actually feeling fairly confident they get this done in late July.
You kick out a great note to clients every week with a little inside something about what's going on in Washington. I always love these. What are you telling people to do if they want to watch this parade? Is there any way to get in and out of town? Is there like a Nathan Dean angle on this massive parade, the Army parade on
Just like
Saturday?
with the NFL, it's great for my couch.
That's a good answer. Buy a blimp, right? We're not even going to be able to get to work in a couple days. You see this? The street closures?
Driving in this morning was
Forget it.
difficult.
It has begun.
Yeah.
Sounds like it might be quite a show, though. Nathan, great. Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence, our senior U.S. policy analyst. How's that for a deep dive? What goes in? What stays out? Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.